Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the open door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. Open to the love of God. Open to joining His stream of love for others. And our panel today features some of our regulars, beginning with Dr. Rhonda Turbin, professor of philosophy, and also a dedicated widow who wrote numerous books about Catholic living. Then we have Dr. Richard Garrity from Birmingham, Alabama, professor of philosophy at EWTN, writer of books about Aristotle's Ethics, Plato's Republic, who is writing the book about Blessed Cardinal Newman's Apologetics. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Jim Hannock from Los Angeles, a philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. Okay, Dr. James, take it away.
This morning, our topic is pragmatism, but not in the abstract. Pragmatism, we're going to poke a little fun at it. So pragmatism, does it work in theory, but not in practice? Now, we have a reason for addressing this question. We want to know what the connection is between pragmatism and our efforts to build a culture of life. Culture is a very, very broad sort of phenomenon, and it's influenced by so many factors. And one factor certainly is what some people call a mindset, and what I would call a philosophy. And I'd like to take a look in particular at pragmatism, because pragmatism is very oftentimes thought of as distinctively American. Now, I'd like to invoke not a pragmatist, but a Thomistic thinker, Jacques Maritain, who's been no longer with us, as they say, for it's getting on to be about 30 years or so. But he was an extraordinarily important philosopher for various reasons, and one of them is that he always tried to address the problems of the culture. Among other things, he was instrumental in putting together the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, and he spent a good deal of time in the United States because, with his wife of Jewish background, he had to flee France for his very life. Now, I'm mentioning Maritain because Maritain always used to say, distinguish in order to unite, not distinguish in order to make more distinctions and then make sub-distinctions. No, distinguish to unite. Now, considering pragmatism, I think there's a difference between pragmatism and being practical. I think there's a difference between pragmatism and Aristotle's notion of practical reasoning. Pragmatism is a view that the most we can know is a strategy for bringing about what we take to be, at least for the time being, some sort of success. Here's a kind of a dictionary definition for people listening in and might not have thought about this notion. Pragmatism considers thought, what we're doing right now, as an instrument or tool for prediction, problem solving and action. And it rejects the idea that the point of thinking is to describe or represent or mirror reality. Pragmatists think that most philosophical topics, what is knowledge, how does language work, how do we form beliefs, so forth, are all best viewed in terms of their practical uses. And I think this idea that the core of pragmatism is no doubt something that pragmatists would want to wrestle with us on. The truth is what works. It's not that we somehow see what is true, but we figure out a way to move ahead. We muddle through more or less successfully. And if we're doing that, then we're being practical. And, well, what could be wrong with that? So there are a couple other philosophers here, not to mention a man of eminent good sense, Bob Olson, our introducer, and I'll ask them to reflect a bit and take us forward.
Well, one thing I would add is take Thomas or take Maritain and take philosophical realists, and they'd say a man is a man and a woman is a woman and a baby is a baby, and they have a nature. So that if you're a man, you necessarily, you can think, and or if you're a woman, there's certain necessity, or if you're a baby. Okay, now, that's not being pragmatic, but the way we run into the issue today is a realist to say this is a man, this is a woman, this is a baby, and then the practical fellow, supposedly, the American, they say, but a lot of people don't agree, see? I mean, this guy looks like a man, but he's really a woman, or maybe he looks like a man, but he wants to be a woman, or this baby really isn't a baby, it's a blob of flesh, or this woman really is so nothing is definite. Nothing is what it is. So you have to go by what people say it is, like in politics, or because they're the people who are acting, they're doing things, see? So you can't ignore them, and they all differ. So you try to patch it together and put together a country out of it, or a city, or a community out of such disparate stuff. And the realists would say, well, Lord save us. If you're going to build a community or a city, we should at least agree on what a man is, or what a woman or is a baby. But that's just what we don't agree on today, and yet we still want to be a nation and vote and be together. And a realist says in the long run, hey, it ain't going to work. You're falling apart. And they say, we're not falling apart. We just got to work out the problems with more discussion. Say, more discussion. What do we do then with men who want to be women, women who want to be men, and people who consider baby? But what do we do with it? We got to do something. And and then Thomas and the tradition say, you got to get your head straight and say this is a man, this is a woman, they have natures. And they say, that's ridiculous, that's natural law. Let's be practical and deal with the way it is. Well, that's destruction. That's the end of the nation. That's the end of Western civilization. So that's the way I grab what you so eloquently put. Go ahead.
Sounds like you grabbed it by the throat, Richard.
What was that?
It sounds like you grabbed it by the throat.
Right, by the throat, right.
Right. What does Rhonda say? Uh-oh. all silent on the Western Front. Well, if we're still going, let me come back for a bit. There's this idea, and Richard certainly introduced us to it, of social construction. So looking at marriage, for example, people will say marriage is a social construction, and we can construct it the way we think it should be best constructed.
Right, that's a good topic, right.
It doesn't have any core reality about it. There are patterns that we can see across the decades, across the generations, and these patterns fluctuate. And it's useful to refer to these patterns as marriage, but they're always fluctuating, and we can choose to direct them in this way or that way. Now, how do we establish our choice? Well, again, as Richard pointed out, we establish our choice, well, we're Americans, democratically, or at least more or less democratically. We determine what marriage will be. And that's exactly what we're experiencing. Now, Bob, could you help us with these beeps I'm hearing?
Okay, I just got lost and I found my way back.
Okay. Welcome. Well,
that's the beep.
To join in.
So, yes, but I don't know what was said in the last 10 minutes that I was cut off. So, let me just, all right.
Well, I just gave a kind of a dictionary definition of pragmatism.
Yeah, I heard that.
And then...
and Richard was talking about this thing of transgender. I got all that.
Okay. So it hasn't been 10 minutes. It might have been 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, I wanted to give an example, a different kind of example, where why pragmatism would seem good. Because I studied pragmatism in college when I was a philosophy major, and I was an atheist. I had never studied any realistic philosophy, so I was taken with it. It sounded great to me. But this is the kind of example, for instance, that John Dewey, one of the most famous pragmatists, probably the most famous, that he gave in one of his things about education. Okay, he said, we have the situation of the farm people gradually moving into cities. Now, their kids go to school in an industrial city. Should those kids be learning about the Trojan War in Rome, or should they be learning how to type? They're going to get work jobs in offices, most of them. So it's only practical, to use the word that is acceptable, it's only practical that they shouldn't be learning all this classical education. They should be learning what they need to know in order to survive in the contemporary world, see? And so many examples of this kind were given to show that pragmatism was true. And just to give another one, which was my favorite pragmatist, was William James, because he was the only one that applied pragmatism to religion in this way. He knew very little Thomist philosophy, and what he did know he didn't like. But he had this religious conversion when he was in despair, and so he wrote this whole book, Varieties of Religious Experience, in which he used pragmatism in this way. He said, instead of asking whether you can prove God's existence and his attributes and all this kind of thing that they did in medieval times, instead of that, let's ask, does religion work? And so he gave umpteen very moving examples about people moving from despair to hope because they had religious conversions. So, okay. So because of that, I read that book. It was the only book I ever read in college that suggested that religion was real and worthwhile. So that stuck in my mind. So even though I absolutely don't think pragmatism as a philosophy is right, I think we should get more of a sense in here of why people thought it was good.
Yes. And there's I think a element in that that's perfectly scriptural. By their fruits you will know them. And if that's what James is saying, that's very, very helpful. He is, though, saying more than that, and in a way less than that, because what he is saying is that religion is a tool that will make us feel better about ourselves. Religion is a tool that will make us feel better about ourselves. And we ought to feel better about ourselves. We will to feel better about ourselves so we can will ourselves to be believers. But of course, what we want is to believe and worship that which is worthy of worship. And our feeling better about ourselves is not worthy of worship. I'm all for feeling better about myself, but that's not the point of religion. And if you take the pragmatist view, you'll say religion or science or holding this belief about the political order. It's all a matter of instrumentalization. It's all a matter of means. But we can't know anything, really, about the truth, about the end of anything. And that's ultimately giving up on human reason. And that's a real worry.
Well, that was absolutely explicit. John Dewey wrote a book against the idea that there were any absolute truths. I forget the exact title, but it was something like Denial of the Absolute or something. And so that's what he claimed that pragmatism would get rid of. Now, you have to realize also, in some ways, pragmatism was a reaction against Hegelianism. So in the philosopher Hegel, who some of you listeners may or may not know, that Hegel was a huge figure in German philosophy, and Hegel developed this whole system of metaphysics that was enormously, let's say, fanciful, futuristic. It had all sorts of difficulties about it. So people who were forced to study Hegel, as John Dewey was, they reacted against it by saying, get rid of all this metaphysics and let's just concentrate on what works. And that seemed very, it seemed to make sense to him and to his followers.
Yes, I think that's historically a good part of what happened. Sometimes we think people are rejecting, in developing their outlook on life, rejecting Thomism or rejecting Thomistic Aristotelian thought, but they might be rejecting something quite different. And that quite different something might also reject Thomism and Aristotelian thinking, as of course Hegel did. Everything is being stirred in a big cultural soup and very vigorously. Well, let me shift our sphere of application a bit. We're all committed to evangelizing. And early on in this show, or this series of installments of this ongoing show, we talked about different ways of evangelizing, and what sort of evangelizing would speak to some people but not to others, and so forth. What would you say about being pragmatic as an evangelist? Let me put that question forward. Is there a role for being pragmatic understood in this way, but not in that way? What are we to say when people say, let's be practical about how we go about this?
Well, I was just online, and they had a meeting down in Florida. I forget, the big convention center. The bishops had all over the United States, you have chanceries and people working with the bishops' conference, and they got all the leaders there, lay people, and they put them down in this convention center. And the question was, well, how are you going to evangelize, or how are you going to spread the faith? And Michael Voris went down there and his crew, but they met security guards, since it was private property, who said, you're not wanted here.
Could you mention to the listeners who he is?
All right, yeah, he's a layman who runs a church militant site, and who's not very popular with the U.S. bishops, because he goes after them a good bit. And how he goes after them, I'll mention as I continue the story.
Yeah.
So they had security guards escort him out, and they didn't want anything to do with him because they labeled him a protester and a disturber, which, but he doesn't go in for those kind of tactics. He just discusses, see. But the question is, what are you going to do to save the church? And and I'll just give you one of his suggestions. One of his suggestions is, you got to preach heaven and hell, because heaven is real and hell is real, and right now people are going to heaven, and right now people are going to hell. And his contention is, of the churchgoers who do go to church, which is considerable less than it used to be, and they're only older people, about 60 or 70% of them believe that same-sex marriage is permissible. Or a large number of them who go to Mass consider it's not sacrilegious for divorced and remarried people to go to communion. So he said, okay, if you want to save the church, you got to talk about that stuff. And of course the others would say, well, no, you'd blow it up into all kind of dissension and all that stuff. That's not the way to talk about it. And that's why they want to keep a guy like Voris away from the discussion. He's just going to get a lot of people mad, and a lot of bishops mad, by being too pointed, because he insists on heaven and hell is real. We don't think it's real, and that's the trouble with the church. We got to get real about that. We need good catechetics. We don't care whether it disturbs people. It should disturb people that you're a candidate for hell. Well, then be disturbed and start getting real, okay? And they say, oh, that's not nice. You should be more accommodating and understand the variety of people. So I guess that would be a practical issue of pragmatism today in the American Catholic Church, and an instance of, hey, you got to deal with what's real, whether people will like reality or not. And the assumption is, because as sinners, we don't like reality. We want the thing the way we want it. Well, so that's...
Okay, I want to address I would like to address this, okay? I used to go door to door with Legion of Mary. So I'm going door to door in Los Angeles in this parish that I'm very familiar with. And this priest, even though he was wonderful in certain ways, he was very strict and stern and would say things that would make people very mad, and they would leave the church over them. Okay. So it wasn't just that he was ideologically conservative. He was also very testy, and like he would say things like, take that crying child out of the church. It's driving me crazy. Things like that. Not very pastoral, right? Okay, so I'm in this parish where I know this priest, and we knock on the door of this person, and they say, oh, well, you know, we left the church. They live 3 blocks from the church. I said, oh, well, we left the church long ago because we didn't like Father so-and-so, all right? And so I know probably why they didn't like Father so-and-so. So I'm arguing about how, you know, we don't say in the creed, I believe in Father so-and-so, the Frank Sheed's big argument he used to say on street corners. Okay, it doesn't say in the creed, I believe in Father so-and-so and Sister so-and-so. So I'm giving these intellectual arguments. Meanwhile, the woman who's doing this with me just looks at this man and says, well, we miss you. We wish you were back with us. Because of what she said, he returned to the church the next week. So it's a huge lesson to me that it doesn't work to just give philosophical apologetic arguments, that it sometimes works better that people feel wanted, invited. And so I thought I had learned that lesson. Then I joined Legion of Mary in California when I'm there. And wonderful. There are like 12 people who go around doing this kind of thing, also bringing the Eucharist to people. Hello?
Yeah. Yes, me.
Oh, okay. There was a ding. I thought, who is the ding?
We wonder about that ding.
I'm not a ding. I'm a ding-dong.
Oh,
okay,
right.
but the ding can be somebody who wants to join us. So if you're coming on and you want to join us, that's fine to just listen. But if you want to say something, please announce yourself.
That's right.
Okay. So, whatever. So, okay. So I'm going around again, and with my usual, you know, I'm fine until someone says something anti-Catholic, and then I start debating with them, okay? And so finally, the other members of the Legion of Mary said, you know, Rhonda, why don't you bring the Eucharist to the sick instead of going door to door? Because even though you're so knowledgeable, that's not what we do. We invite them lovingly and we hand them literature, but we don't get into debates with them. So these examples show how in evangelization you could say it's not practical just because some argument is true to use this as your lead-in to an confused individual on the other side of a door.
Well, you're bringing up the question of what works, what approach you should take. But let's take the example you just gave. This one guy who stayed away from the church, because the priest was very austere and forbidding. So he was orthodox, but he seemed to alienate people. And then, as you tell the story, you were going to start maybe arguing with him, but this other lady said, we miss you. She used a very soft approach, and he went to church the next week. But here, so fine. But, see, the question is, if it's true, if the truth is there's a heaven and there's a hell, and heaven is eternal and hell is eternal, and all of us are sinners, and we're destined to hell unless we accept Christ, the church, and to get to heaven. So the church is necessary to get to heaven. Okay, now that's a lot of teaching involved in that, and that's the reality. It is the reality, right? Whether it's worded elegantly or not, it is the reality. How did the church ever convince people that this was real? I mean, how did that happen? Did they do it by being nice? Did they do it by being arguing? Or what? And then I suppose you'd have to look for the history of the church. And the history of the church shows that ordinary people grabbed onto this, startling business and died for the church, if they're being roasted or spitted on wheel, it actually took power. Well, how did it work? And then when we were kids, you said, well, the Holy Spirit just came down and inspired them all. And, I don't know. You're still presented with the problem that even though it's a loving message, it's a very tough message. It has been bought by the early church. People don't buy it now. What do? Now you can make it work and people come to church, but a lot of people who actually go to Mass don't believe in the teachings of the church, like same-sex marriage is wrong and all that stuff. I mean, they don't believe it.
Or the real presence.
The real presence, for God's sake. The real presence. They go there and they don't believe it. Now, what are you going to do? Do you have a nice approach or what approach or, And I guess what Michael does is he goes after the bishops and says, wake up. This is the situation, and you guys ain't helping it. You got to get out there and fight for the faith and even die for it. And there's no nice way to do it. That's what he's saying.
Let me try to distinguish, to unite, going back to Maritan's famous line. When Richard gave his examples, I thought, yes, that's true. And when Rhonda gave her example, especially because I know to whom she's referring, I said, yes, that's true. Now, how is it that they're both true? In the course of history, depending on the situation, the church has done different things. For example, in the recent past, not so ancient at all, the missionaries of charity have, in Muslim countries, simply practiced the works of mercy. And even though that's all they've done, even though they've simply practiced the works of mercy, they have been among, a number of them now, I think half a dozen or more, have been martyred. They are now among the martyrs. And if you look at a different context, say the Albigensian heresy, which is really a form of Gnosticism, which tells us about special revelations and special truths hidden to those who aren't really among the elect. If you look at the Albigensian heresy, say in France and in Spain, you have the Dominican order, and the Dominican order did engage in debate. That's one of the reasons why St. Thomas wrote the Summa Contra Gentiles, is to prepare his friars to engage in debate. So I think there's a practical dimension very definitely a practical dimension. But there's also Christ's promise. Look, you see what they're doing to me. They will do that to you if you preach the gospel. Now, I think that at some point, the gospel must be fully preached. There's a story, and maybe it's just a story, but I haven't really seen it persuasively overturned, that the great Jesuit missionary to China, whose name for just this moment escapes me.
Oh, Francis Xavier?
No.
Father Bishop Walsh, I think. Walsh.
No, even after that, the fellow who brought so much of Western science to China.
Way back in...
Yes.
Ricci?
Well, yeah, Matteo Ricci. All right. He didn't talk about Christ's crucifixion because he thought it would just be absolutely unintelligible to the leaders of China. Now, you might not bring it up in your first discussion or your fifth discussion, but if you don't bring it up, you haven't preached the gospel. And of course, we have different personalities. Rhonda has one personality, Richard has another personality, Bob the same. And so that has to be part of it. And that, apart from history, we look to Scripture itself, and we see it how it is with Jesus. Jesus welcomes the little children, right? He doesn't say, you're a bunch of brats, and I've got serious work to do here. He welcomes the little children. But he also says, and this is interesting, I think it's in Matthew 25, that he talks about those who will be damned. And who is it that will be damned? He speaks in terms of, I guess, orthopraxis, those who don't help the sick, those who don't help the poor, those who don't recognize Christ in the least little ones. And he is not at all hesitant to talk about damnation in the context of what today a number of people would present along the lines of social gospel. So I guess what I want to say is we can certainly be flexible and we can certainly meet people where they are, but if we don't say what we have to say, what's the point of meeting them where they are?
Well, okay. Let me put a point on that, all of this now. Now, the issue is, what do you do? How do you handle baptized people? Well, first of all, you got to get the babies, let's say infant baby, you got to get them to the baptism font and baptize them, see. And but you have to agree on what the baptism is. The traditional teaching is that baptism removes them from the kingdom of Satan, and the Holy Trinity resides in the soul of that baby. And the baby don't know nothing of what's happening, but the parents and the priests believe that with the saying of the words and the pouring of the water over the head of that child, that's what happens. Now, if you don't believe that, then you're not a Catholic. It's not Catholic baptism. And a lot of people don't believe it. They believe it's some kind of initiation rite and all that. But let's just take that as a point of belief. Now, that's what I learned in the Baltimore Catechism in my generation, okay? And it was real, and you only learn about it when you're 7 or 8, and then they teach you that. See, they teach you that. Now, Voris's contention is, when catechetics declines, well, you don't do that anymore. People don't know what's happening at baptism. They don't know what's happening at Mass because they haven't been catechized. And we know the result, whether they aimed it or not, the spirit of Vatican II, the Baltimore Catechism went out. went out inadequate. They're looking for a better way to do it. And he's saying the result of the better way to do it is no catechetics at all. People are abysmally ignorant. Now he's saying you gotta know this. The faith is something you gotta know. And therefore there's nothing ridiculous about kids memorizing the answers, even though some of the nuns are too strict, some of the nuns are crazy, some of the priests are crazy, they're sinners, and all that. So what? You gotta teach it. And when you don't teach it, you have ignorance, and when you have ignorance, the church dies. Now that's a pretty definite way of speaking, right?
Okay. Now, I have a big ad hominem argument against you, Richard. Is it really ad hominem? Ad hominem means you go to the jugular of the person you're arguing with about his individual personality.
All right, wait a second.
Okay, you, Richard.
Wait
you let me finish. You won't let me get a word in.
But I got to stop you before you go the wrong way with me.
No, it's right. It's the right way.
Yeah, no, because, listen, I'm not talking about arguing with anyone. I'm just saying, hey, this is his version of why the church is in decline, no catechetics, and the bishops aren't thinking of catechetics.
Okay, yeah. But, however,
that's my general situation. All right, now go ahead. So whether I'm arguing, well, go ahead now. Go ahead.
Okay, Richard Garrity, taught at the seminary for many years.
Right.
You taught the seminarians the truths of Catholic philosophy and the truths of the faith. You taught these truths not with rancorous rage and denunciation. You taught them with humor and incisive truth.
Right.
Okay? So I would rather see your approach, which between speaking the truth with love, which we're enjoying to do, and speaking the truth by denunciation and a look on the face, on Boris's face of total angry, repressed rage. I would much rather have Richard Garrity teaching people, as he does on EWTN. They do reruns of things he's done on EWTN. So that's the possibility. You don't have to say either teach nothing or teach the truth with hate. You could teach the truth with love and humor.
See, now you're opposing me to Michael Voris, see?
Right.
But let me speak for myself. I identify very much with Voris. I like the guy. I like the way he has it. I like his humor, and I think I get along with him fine. Now, I don't know. Should I be so agreeable with Michael Voris? I mean, you have your view, and you make us contrast, but that ain't my view. And I suppose really, here, let me put it this way. A bishop grabbed he looked at some of the handouts that Michael was handling, and it said, you got to teach about heaven and hell. Well, he said, I agree with the points. Well, you got to agree that Christ is present, real present. I agree with those 4 points. I just don't trust Church Miller and Michael Voris. Well, okay, then you're at the beginning of a discussion, but at least objectively, you agree with the basic point. The next point is Michael Voris gone overboard on uncharitable and all that business, which is another type of discussion. But at least you're talking about catechetics, the truth, and then so that objectively there. And then you may have a problem with personalities. But that's a separate thing, personalities. So I don't know if that answers
Can I intervene at this point?
Jim, you had a point, yes.
Yeah. Not to ignore the discussion that we've been having at all, but to maybe add some other layers to it. And then I want to get to also, and we've only got 15 minutes, blimey, I want to get to the political dimension of this. Here's some personal anecdotes. Not so very long ago, although it's getting to be, I'm surprised, quite a while ago, during the days of an active Operation Rescue in Los Angeles, an evangelical friend, somebody connected with, and some of the listeners will know about this, somebody connected with Calvary Chapel said, well, we've decided not to do any more nonviolent direct action in this area of abortion. What we've decided to do, we had a big discussion about it, this summer our goal is to distribute across the beaches of Southern California, where there are a lot of people, 1 million leaflets announcing the core of the good news. Now, I'm sure that they thought that was a very practical thing to do. And I have no doubt that some of the people receiving these 1 million leaflets, and they probably gave out pretty close to 1 million leaflets, that some of them stopped by Calvary Chapel. On the other hand, I also think that 999,000 of the leaflets were left at the beach. However, that's an interesting case. What would be more practical? Now, give you another interesting case.
Wait, before you continue, tell me what that chapel used to do before they did the leaflets again.
Well,
will you repeat that, what they used to do?
They did all sorts of things. Think of an active evangelical group. They have energetic religious services. They have their books. They have the different groups that are operating within their congregation. It's an active group of evangelical Christians. But they decided that they're no longer going to be involved in what I would call prophetic pro-life ministry. Instead...
all right. In other words, they used to go out against abortion, too, then, right?
Okay. So that's case one. Just interesting. They would say, we think this is more practical. We think this would be a better use of our time at any rate.
To be less confrontational.
Yes.
Then.
Now, flash forward to a week ago. I have 3 young people from, guess where, Calvary Chapel in Inglewood, appear on the front porch. We do a little discussion about justification by faith and what that involves. And the key question for the one who was most articulate among them was whether or not I knew with certitude here and now that I was saved. And he said this, proposed this test question in a very friendly, affable sort of way. And I said, well, I could have moral certitude that I'm free from sin, but look here, St. Paul says, I don't even judge myself, although I'm not conscious of any wrong, I do not judge myself. And the fellow then says to me, well, it saddens me that you're not absolutely sure that here and now you are saved. And I didn't get argumentative, and I told as many jokes as I usually do, and that was his effort to preach a hard truth, which I don't think is true, but to do it in a friendly sort of way. Interesting case. So I don't know if that does anything more than throw in a couple of extra examples.
But so I guess the question is, one difficulty with pragmatism, the way I like to put it, is something works because it's true. It's not true because it works.
Yes. To apply this to this instance,
if someone says, well, what's one baby saved because we did pro-life witness in front of the abortion clinic? What's one baby saved compared to all these people whose souls are going to be saved because we went door to door? So it appears as if as soon as you begin to try to do this statistically, try to determine what works and what doesn't work, you get into something, extremely problematic, because what does it mean?
Yes, I think a fundamental objection to pragmatism with the ISM on it, the truth is what works, is that you've got to get to truth about what does work. And what works is that which is in accord with reality, not that which is in accord with our shifting strategies. So this old expression, kicking the can down the road? The truth is what works. Well, what's the truth about what works? What works? What's the truth about what works? You've got to stop and think about what is the truth. And then if there's anything true in Scripture, it's that if you preach the gospel, you will suffer from preaching the gospel. That's certainly the truth, and the whole of Christianity shows that to be the case. Well, because there are only a few minutes left now, suppose somebody says, well, pragmatism, not the same as just being practical, it's an ideology, pragmatism, but it affects how we think in America in so many different ways, and then let's turn to politics. Guess what? You have so many people who voted for Hillary Clinton, so many people who voted for Donald Trump. More people didn't vote for anyone. The none of the aboves actually won, but they didn't win because they didn't have any candidate, they didn't have any party, they didn't have any organization. What they can do is continue to bellyache. Now, in the course of American history, American political history, there have been any number of third parties. And sometimes we get up to 3 truly functioning parties, but usually that doesn't last for more than an election round or 2. We had Teddy Roosevelt, right? He had a semi-functioning third party, but once there was no Teddy Roosevelt, that was the end of that. Now the question is, could there be, is it Don Quixote or is it Abraham Lincoln? Could there be a political party which, while clearly distinct from any kind of Christian faith itself, embodies core principles of the Judeo-Christian ethos? Could there be such a party? I think there could be, but it sure faces the hurdle of pragmatism in various ways. One of the ways is the American Solidarity Party is now very oftentimes trying to reach out to what are called pro-life Democrats. Now you say, are there any? Yes, there are. There's a pro-life Democratic Party caucus, and they're very, very active. And we try to reach out to them in various digital ways. We try to connect with them. Now, their argument will be, well, we've got a much better chance of changing the Democratic Party than you folks have of bringing into existence a viable third party. So once again, we have this pragmatism issue. Thoughts?
Now, the immediate question for the voter is people would argue if the American Solidarity Party had been around more strongly in the last election, voting for them would take away votes for the better of the 2 other candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what people argued pragmatically. It doesn't work. Even if you think this party is the better party, your vote is really a vote against the candidate who was better in the last election.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping you have an answer to that, because I just joined the American Solidarity Party and I didn't think of this issue.
Well, here's an answer that I have that, that people don't much like, but it is true. I'm sure that there have been races for dog catcher in Arkansas that have been decided by one vote. However, where I am in the state of California, one vote for Hillary would make no difference at all because she was a shoo-in. One vote for Donald would make no difference at all because he didn't have a hope in hell of winning the state of California. And one vote for the American Solidarity Party would mean that if you talked about it to people, maybe 100 people would take a little bit more seriously. If you talk it up, maybe 100 people would take a little bit more seriously the idea that, no, you don't have to accept one or other of these abysmal alternatives. You could build something new. And at one point, that's how we came to have the Republican Party of Lincoln, historically. Of course, along the way, we've had any number of absolutely, totally failed attempts to construct a third party. Many are called, few are elected.
Remind me of this. It sounds good, but remind me of this when we get closer to the next election.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes left.
And we're probably just at the end here. I just want to mention...
We have 4 minutes left.
All right, I just want to mention, just for those doubters out there, that the party now has its first elected official. You say, yeah, who? And I'll say, truth be told, I can't remember his name, but he looks like a decent fellow, and he's the city attorney of Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So we start small. Maybe we'll stay small. But the practical question is, can we have a third party? Pragmatists would say, well, if you get one, then you can get one, but you can't say ahead of time whether you'll get one or not. You can't say ahead of time that your party is the party that is closest to the truth, because the truth is determined by who's successful, and you're not successful, so you could say you have important truths, but that's you, and who cares, right? We want to listen to the people. We want to give press time to the people who are the winners. And I think the truth of it is that way of thinking is a fundamental impediment to any kind of political sanity. But that's my
very good.
pitch. That's my
very good.
Pitch.
Excellent.
We have time for a prayer, I'll bet. Rhonda, what do you say?
Mm-hmm. I say this panel, we want our panel to display different points of view, especially because many of us are retired professors. So we want to learn from each other, even in our old age. And so I learned a lot. And I thank everyone for being on the panel. And dear listeners, we hope that you learned a lot. Write in, let us know.
And next week we'll be back at the same time.
If you listen in, speak up.
Same station. And in the meantime, may God bless us, protect us from all evil, and bring us into everlasting life. Amen.
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 We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.